Love staying informed? Subscribe now and get unlimited access to local news, weather, and sports for just 99 cents a month for your first 3 months at inforum.news/join. Read every story, listen to every podcast, and download the apps that keep you informed and on the go 24 hours a day. So head to inforum.news/join right now to subscribe. What are you waiting for? Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month at inforum.news/join.
Welcome to Plain Talk. Happy to be with you and hoping not to have any technical difficulties. Of course, 5 minutes before we start recording the show, my internet service provider shows up. They're like, oh, we need to get into your backyard. And I'm like, well, you're not going to turn my internet off, are you? And they said, no, there's just some old wire that we have to take down. Everything will be fine. So fingers crossed that we don't have any problems and that you don't hear my dogs who are going nuts about stranger danger in the backyard. Hey, we're going to be talking about one of the legislative races, and there's going to be several around the state, but one of them that's going to be worth keeping an eye on for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's going to be a hot race, I think. Second of all, it deals with one of the lawmakers, one of the incumbent lawmakers in the district is without question probably one of the most polarizing political figures in our state right now. That's State Representative Brandon Prichard. Now, District 8, of course, is a Bismarck area district. It's parts of Bismarck and then, of course, rural areas on the periphery of Bismarck. So here to talk with us about that, of course, joining along with my co-host Chad Oban, is Mike Berg and Ken Rensch, who are two candidates who are going to be running against the incumbents in that district, the House incumbents in that district, Representative SuAnn Olson and Representative Brandon Prichard. Senator Jeff Magrum, he's the senator from that district, to my knowledge, does not have a challenger at this point. So, gentlemen, welcome to the show. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. We're excited to be here this morning.
Mike, first of all, tell me, why are you running?
Yeah, I think the people in District 8 could have people in the North Dakota House that represent them better. I think focusing on what's best for the people of District 8, a couple big issues, law enforcement. You know, we've got some drug issues here in North Dakota, and law enforcement is a big issue. Economy, jobs, making sure people have opportunities. And, you know, I felt it was the right thing to do, to run and give people choice.
Ken, same question to you.
Yeah. As Mike stated, I think our government is getting too involved in people's lives. I mean, me and both Republicans, we truly do believe in limited government, and I want to see that. You know, protection of our individual liberties is, I mean, utmost importance to both myself and Mike here. I'm also concerned with transparency and accountability with our current government, not just at the state level, federal level, but also involving state level issues. And then spending, you know, we need to get the handle on our state spending, and I know property tax is going to be a hot topic coming up in the next few years, and so yeah, I think we have some things to fix going forward. And
can you guys tell us a little bit about your backgrounds, professional backgrounds, family, that kind of thing? Let the listeners sort of know who you are. Mike, starting with you.
Sure. Grew up in Hettinger, North Dakota. Dad was a veterinarian, had a small ranch. Went to NDSU for engineering. And when I graduated, I lived out of state for a while. Couldn't find an engineering job in North Dakota when I graduated. The economy was a lot different than it is today. When we started having children, we decided we want to move back to North Dakota and raise our family here. North Dakota is just a great place to raise a family. And, so we moved back and we have 2 kids. And, for years I was busy with kids' activities, coaching sports and Sunday school and all those items. And now my kids are old enough where I don't have the skills to really help on those things anymore. So,
Ken, what's your background?
I grew up in Garrison. My family had an implement dealership in Garrison. So from the time I was, I think about 6 years old, I was sweeping the floor down there on the weekends. And that's, that was my Saturday morning. So I graduated from Garrison, did EMS around 2003, went to BSc for paramedic school. Around 2014, I saw a need on the rural EMS side. There were some struggling services, so I started Ambulance Resources, which is a management and staffing company. So right now we do a lot of work with rural ambulance districts, providing staffing and management services for them. And so,
if listeners couldn't tell, Mike Berg is also the brother of Rick Berg. And I say that if you've ever heard Rick Berg talk, and you probably have, his brother sounds just like him. You sound a lot like your brother, Mike. You guys have the same cadence and the same sound of voice.
Well, thank you.
It's nice you took that as a compliment. I think if somebody said I sounded like my brother, I'm not sure I would take it that way.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So let's talk a little bit about, obviously you guys are running for the legislature because of the issues you mentioned. I mean, crime, transparency and accountability in government. As a member of the media, I'd like to talk to you a little bit more about that, Ken. But obviously, I mean, there's been, Representative Prichard, as I said at the beginning, has become a polarizing figure in that district. Said some very outlandish things. I think that's a fair way to describe it on social media. Has brought, made some national headlines with that sort of thing. And also is on the campaign trail right now, sort of campaigning against other incumbent Republicans. Like he's showing up in their legislative districts as the executive director of this group called Citizens Alliance, and is putting information, some of it not very accurate, in front of delegates there. I mean, polarizing in a lot of ways. The polarizing not just in like controversial things, but also polarizing. I got to think within the caucus, there's going to be some Republicans that show up, and are going to serve in the House of Representatives, who Representative Prichard actively campaigned against as a fellow Republican. That's going to be a very strange dynamic. I'm trying to think of a precedent for that in North Dakota politics, and there's really not very many. Talk about that a little bit. I mean, was that part of your calculus in deciding to run?
Yeah. I think it's going to be a challenge to serve the people in District 8 on issues that are important to them if you've alienated a lot of the rest of the legislators that you work with. So that's definitely a concern, and get back to are the people of District 8 being represented in the best way that they can in the legislature.
So your district is a little unique. I mean, what we are seeing around the state, it's very much people who fancy themselves being on the far right, challenging incumbent legislators. And here, it's you guys challenging folks that are members of the far right Bastiat caucus. One of the things I find most interesting is listening to the two of you talk at the outset. It doesn't sound like you're moderates, right? I mean, you're both conservative, but it sounds like your style might be a little bit different in terms of working with folks that maybe aren't agreeable 100%. Can you talk a little bit about that? How you'd go about building relationships in the legislature, across the aisle, across the political spectrum within the Republican Party to get things done for the District 8 constituents? Because it doesn't seem like the current incumbents are all that concerned about getting things done. It's mostly about, or at least one of them. I don't know SuAnn particularly well, but could you talk a little bit about how you'd go about the work to get things done? And if you consider yourselves conservatives.
Yeah, both Ken and I are small business owners. We've built small businesses into successful operations. We know how to work with people to get things done. Speaking for myself, my career as an engineer, I'm a problem solver. And so I've spent my career trying to get an accurate understanding of the issues and then making a decision once I understand the issues that impact the item that we're working on.
So I think it's imperative that you reach across the aisle, not only, there has to be a conversation had with, your far right, your moderate Republicans, and on the left. Everybody might have good input or, common sense type of things. And I think that's one of the areas where it's frustrated me is some of the stuff I'm seeing doesn't seem common sense. It doesn't seem, it seems like we're more attacking individual type liberties as opposed to protecting them.
Give us some examples, Ken.
Talking about the church, I've heard statements said about we need to protect the religious liberties of government officials, and whether or not they don't, or whether they do or don't want to marry somebody. Protect the churches, where I think individual liberty truly comes down to us. We need to, if Mike has the right to practice whatever religion he wants to practice, I believe everyone should have that right.
Yeah. That was one thing that Representative Prichard kind of made headlines about, is he wanted to put Christ as king in state code, which I think kind of runs contrary. I mean, I don't mind. There's plenty of North Dakotans who believe that, and that's great. I don't begrudge them their faith at all. The problem is we have Hindus and Jewish people and Buddhist people and all sorts of other people who don't feel that way. So I think that's to your point. When you were talking about, I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about accountability and transparency, because that really seems like a big thing right now. We have the email scandal at the Attorney General's office. We have that we've really seen a struggle. I think in the accountability process for that. We have a member of the State House of Representatives who's also caught up in that in a related scandal with a building lease, and that's currently there's currently a misdemeanor charge against him regarding that. I do think that there is, when you bring that up, I think it's really important, because I'm wondering if there aren't a lot of North Dakota voters out there who are looking at their state government right now and some of these big headline-making scandals. And I don't think it's fair. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think there's a lot of people that work in state government who are fine, honest, wonderful people. But there's a perception right now that we have a problem, and I think we do have a problem. So when you say accountability and transparency, what do you mean? I mean, what sort of issues under that umbrella would you like to tackle?
I think the biggest issue is it relates to our open records and open meetings. And it's not just at a state level. I mean, there's been concerns at local levels involving open records and open meetings. And some of that does come back to the Attorney General's office, with the AG opinion issues that we currently have. I know the Attorney General's office is way behind on opinions, and there was legislation, last session in which gave the AG's office some ability with, repeated AG opinions, where if it was the same topic being sent in every week, that, they wouldn't have to do every single one, that they can reference some of that. And part of me was a little bit concerned with that bill, because I don't want, if you do have a local government or a state government that violates open records and meetings, I mean, that is the avenue that we have to send in and request an AG opinion involving it. I don't know how, right now I think they're 18 months or possibly even further behind than that, where if we do have an open record or meeting violation, are we truly doing justice to the citizens if it for 18 months?
Yeah. Well, even I think in my practice, it's taken, because I filed a few of these, not recently, and not since our new Attorney General, but usually about 6 months, and even that's tough. By the time 6 months go by, whatever issue that you're looking to get information about, maybe a moot point by the time you finally get the information. So that's really interesting. And you're right. I mean, I think one of our most powerful tools for accountability, I'm going to get on my media soapbox here for a minute. One of our most powerful tools for accountability are those records. I mean, a lot of times there are things we would not find out about were it not for our access to those records. So I'm really glad to hear you say that. Although on the other side of it, I mean, I think it is fair to say that legislation, there's some bad actors out there who use the open records requests to kind of harass local officials, and because they're obligated to respond to everyone, and the attorney general is obligated to write an opinion about everyone, they can really gum up the process. And that's unfortunate, and I'm open to ways to protect against that, but we got to keep the laws open.
Right. And one other thing with that, the way the attorney general opinions currently are is we could video, a meeting that wasn't advertised. We have actual video proof that this meeting occurred. And if you send in for the attorney general opinion, in law, it has to base their decision, and they have to use the information that they received from the political subdivision involving that violation. So it's like, I don't quite understand why that is. We could have overwhelming proof that they violated open meeting laws. But if the entity, the political subdivision itself, sends in and says, well, this wasn't a meeting, we didn't have a quorum, this or that, that's what the attorney general's office have to base it off of. And if you want to go any further than that, you have to bring legal action yourself, which creates a little bit of an issue. And on the accountability side, I think we have some issues with state agencies that their primary job is regulatory authority. And I don't know that they're necessarily doing that. Not to my satisfaction. Coming from a healthcare background, I know we've had some issues with regulatory authorities and with the state involving, complaints involving patient care, things like that, where I think we need to make sure that our regulatory authority agencies are actually following the law and, ensuring that the public are being served appropriately.
I'm going to shift gears slightly. Property taxes were mentioned earlier. There's obviously the potential of an initiated measure, constitutional measure being on the ballot in November to eliminate property taxes with very little plan to replace the $1.5 billion of annual assessed value of property taxes. I think both of your opponents, for sure, Prichard is of that measure. That again doesn't have a plan to replace the $1.5 billion of annual income that will be lost. Where are you guys on the elimination of property, the initiated measure that would eliminate property taxes? And follow-up is, if that's not the solution to property taxes, do you have any thoughts on what we could do to alleviate some of the pain property owners are feeling? Mike, do you want to start with that?
Sure. At the end of the day, I think taxes need to be simple, fair, and low. And, talking through this property tax reform issue, it's really working through, does that accomplish these three things? Taxes are really we've got sales taxes, we've got property taxes, we've got income taxes, we've got user fees, we've got special assessments. All those things add up to be our tax burden. If we're just moving that around to different areas, are we really lowering our taxes? And, I think our taxes need to be transparent. Are we making it easier or harder to see where those taxes for that? So there's some issues that I think people want to understand when they work through this property tax reform issue.
Just to be clear, do you support or oppose the measure, Mike?
I need to learn some more about it. I need to understand, is this really going to lower our overall tax burden? And I don't know that it is from the way I've seen it right now. And is it going to help local control, or does it just make it harder to see where your taxes payments are coming from? And I guess that's my concern.
And I'll jump in there. I think that hits the nail on the head. I don't know a conservative that has ever thought taking essentially the power of the purse away from your local elected officials and saying, we're going to give that to the larger government, the state government, and think that we're going to have, more local control over it. I think we have to keep that control local, whether it's an ambulance district, a fire district, a park board, your city, your county. If your school system wants to build a new school, they might have a local measure. Do we want to fund this school? them decisions are local. As soon as we make that, give that the power of the purse, over for our local governments to the state legislature, that creates a problem. And I think it'll end up costing taxpayers more. As soon as we don't have property tax, now we're going to lose revenue off of wind farms. We're going to lose property taxes off of pipelines, out-of-state property owners that have a ranch or a couple $1 million lake home. We're going to have to make up that revenue, and it's going to have to come from state taxpayers.
Yeah, there's a lot of in lieu of payments where you have windmills are one, wind turbines, wind farms are one example of that. But I mean, there's a lot. I mean, like rural electric cooperatives. I mean, there's a lot of where we have sort of said, okay, well, it doesn't make a lot of sense for them to pay the property tax, so we're going to do something. There's a big ball of yarn there that's going to have to be unwound, and it's not as simple as just replacing revenue from residential property taxes. If we eliminate this, it's going to, and by the way, it doesn't really eliminate property taxes either. We could tax property in other ways. It doesn't ban that. You could put a square footage tax on property. You just can't tax the value according to this measure. Anyway, I'm getting off topic. One thing that I think that's related to the property tax is, what really concerns me about the property tax is that if we shift it to the state budget, the state budget in North Dakota is unusual, maybe compared to a lot of other states, because of how much revenue we get from the oil and gas industry, not just directly. A lot of the direct funds get diverted not into the general fund, but into a lot of different special funds, but also indirectly, when you think of the number of oil workers that pay the income tax, when you think of, the amount of commerce, that is driven through the sales tax by oil activity. One thing that's really sort of confounding, I think, is we take these problems and we kind of hide them in all that excessive revenue that we have. And there hasn't really been a cost for that in the past because North Dakota taxpayers aren't feeling it. We're just sort of hiding it in all those oil tax revenues. It's allowed us to do a lot of things, I think, maybe that worked in the short term that maybe won't work in the long term. Anyway, Ken, when you were talking about transparency and things, one thing that's really frustrating to me is the amount of like special funds that we have that are all over the map, and they all have different statutory whatever. That seems really confusing, and I worry sometimes too when we spend directly out of these funds, like say we spend directly out of the SIF fund or something, it doesn't go through the general fund, so sometimes it's hard to account for that spending because when you're doing a calculation on general fund spending, it won't include special fund spending. Does that concern you at all? Have you thought about those issues at all?
I think we have to have a hard look at type of funding, and some of that, I think back, what really first got me interested into the legislature was I worked on rural EMS assistance grant bill, which, I mean, we could say that's a special type of interest, special type of fund. And I know that your rural communities, are heavily reliant on that fund. I think there's things out there that we want, that we definitely have to fund. I think some of our current representatives, they want to vote no on all types of funding. They want to vote no on, law enforcement measures. I mean, we all like infrastructure. We all like having roads. We all like having the snow cleared from the roads.
We all like having the ambulance show up when we're hurt.
Exactly. So I think there are concerns with where some of the money is going, but I also think some of it, I don't want to live without. So we need to have common sense reform of taxes, property taxes, and probably spending policies as well. So.
Mike, we mentioned your brother earlier, served in the legislature for a long time. He actually came in the same year as my dad, and I've got to say, I really, really like your brother. He's always been super nice to me. I assume he's had some advice for you. What advice have you received from the former Speaker of the House, Congressman, in terms of how to be an effective lawmaker?
Was he Speaker or Majority Leader?
He was speaker he might have been both.
He was majority leader. I don't remember him being speaker, but maybe I'm
I
wrong.
thought he was speaker before he's been. Well,
That could be.
This isn't about Rick Berg. This is about Mike Berg.
Okay.
Yeah, well, I think one thing that Rick has always done real effectively is trying to understand the problem. And when you talk to him about an issue, he'll talk through what the considerations are that go into weighing decisions. So that's number one, is probably listening and trying to understand. And and as far as on working, being a legislator, working hard, integrity, honesty, sticking to your values, and then everything else gets simple.
Yeah,
pretty good advice.
I think that makes a lot of sense, and also speaks to the working across the aisle thing. I mean, if you have convictions, it doesn't really matter who has a good idea, right? A good idea is just a good idea. And if it's somebody who you disagree with on every other issue, you could set all that aside and say, well, I agree with you on this issue. Let's get something done. Gosh, I feel like our government needs more of that right now. And can you speak to that? I mean, there's an element of this, and obviously in this race, I mean, your opponent, Brandon Prichard, is, I would say, is maybe the model for the performative politician in North Dakota, where it's a lot of, performing for a social media audience or performing for a television audience. And that worries me, because I think that's the wrong priority. I mean, I kind of want my elected officials to be more boring. I think that sounds terrible, but I want a lot of nerds who are going to go through the budget line by line and bring up, be willing to have a discussion about water issues or something that might make most people fall asleep. And yet it's hugely important, because we all want water to show up, clean water to show up when we turn on our faucet. So can you speak a little bit? How do you guys, appeal to voters in an era where it seems like a lot of voters want a performance?
Well, that's probably one of the challenges is, the number of people that are paying attention to what's going on in politics. A lot of people have gotten fed up with politics. People want politicians that are honest, ethical, and transparent. And, speaking to that is a big part of what we're doing. I think that's one of the challenges that we deal with in the state and nationally right now.
Well, gentlemen, I appreciate you coming on. Good luck in District 8, and we'll see you down the campaign trail, I suppose.
All right. Thank you much for having us,
guys.
Hi, everybody. I'm Chad Kuhl, host of the Northland Outdoors podcast. Hey, here in the Northland, we love our time outside. And on the Northland Outdoors podcast, we're going to talk about all of it. Not just fishing, not just hunting, but mountain biking, camping, rock climbing, bird watching, you name it. We're going to have it on the Northland Outdoors podcast. New episodes every 2 weeks on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. So look for it and join us on the Northland Outdoors podcast.
Welcome back. Just talked to two candidates from District 8, Mike Berg, Ken Rensch. If you live in District 8, those are two candidates worth evaluating and checking out as you make your decisions leading up to Election Day. And also, if you don't live in District 8, I feel like that might be a bellwether state or bellwether race for how things are going to go in North Dakota. So,
I agree, Rob. It's a bellwether of what we want our politics to look like moving forward.
Right.
Do we want Brandon Prichard, sort of this flamethrower, get as much attention, don't get anything done sort of model, or do you want, a couple of guys who are community members who are really focused on what's good for their friends and neighbors, and are conservative? I mean,
right.
I was listening to their opening statement. It's like, Jesus, these guys they're legit conservatives. These aren't guys who are going to go in there and be rhinos, if you will.
But also, where they're going to be, like they have their convictions and they're going to vote no on things they don't agree with. But on the other hand, like they're not going to be afraid if a Democrat's got a good idea to latch onto it.
It's a style difference, right? It's a difference of approach.
But important. I mean, I think when you say style difference, I don't want people to think, and I don't think you are, to think that you're minimizing it. That style difference is important. It's hugely important.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, like when the election's over or the legislative session is over, we still got to live with one another. And I think that's what we're forgetting. Like every election's the election to end all elections, but it's not. There's always another election coming, and we have got to figure out how to live with one another. And
I think often legislators win an election and then they forget that they are now the representative for every person who lives in their district, not just the people who agree with them. And so how do you represent a constituency if you're demonizing such a large group of them?
Well, and it's I mean, do you want two guys who have, or two candidates who, I mean, they've started businesses, they have families, they have paid taxes. Do you want them or a 20-something professional activist? I mean, because that's really, I mean, when he's not being a lawmaker, now he's working for an activist group. What do you want? I would like to get back to the model of sort of citizen legislature again, right? These guys are taking time off, and they're not the only ones. We have plenty of people in the legislature, Republican and Democrat, who do that, taking time off from their day jobs, to basically sacrifice because they're interested in governing our state well, and we can agree with them or disagree with them and have all those debates. But I mean, just starting from that point is so important to me.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you made me just think about citizen legislators, and I had a conversation with a state senator probably 6 months ago or so, and I was talking about something that, sort of a give and take political issue, and he's like, sorry, man, I haven't been tracking this. I've been really busy with my real job. That's what citizens and their constituents are dealing with, right? They're not paying attention to this stuff, whatever. And I thought it was really refreshing that, and this wasn't like a policy issue or whatever. This was something involving sort of give or take, like some of the political stuff that maybe isn't that important in terms of policy. And it's a good reminder that we do want a citizen legislature, not just professional. I'm about to demonize the term politician, which is going to be a nice bridge, but we don't want professional politicians in our legislature necessarily, but they're still politicians.
Yeah. Well, that's the other thing is I wrote a column this week, if we could switch gears a little bit. And I was picking on Tammy Miller, but I think we need to be fair and say that she's far from the only,
not even close to the only one
who does this. She's just the one who's kind of very prominent right now. With her campaign messaging. I am really tired of people who are running for elected office telling me that they're not politicians. I know people like to hear that because we have this very cynical idea about what politicians are, and I would argue that is unfair. I mean, you can be a politician and also like a good public servant, and it doesn't matter. Like maybe you're running for office the first time, or maybe you're trying to get elected to your 6th term. You can still be a good public servant. There's this thing where automatically, if you're a politician, you're a bad politician, and the only thing that really matters is the amount of time you've been in office or what your resume is. And don't get me wrong, those things are worth considering, but it's just like we've deviated. Like we're not, well, how were they voting when they were in office? Does that make you mad? Are you upset about that? But it really bothers me. Like the Tammy Miller thing, I think is so egregious because I'm an outsider. Your current office is 20 feet down the hall from the one you want. You have spent the last half decade working in the governor's office. You got an entree into politics from the current governor. I don't know, how does that not make you an insider? I don't understand.
I also think, and you're right, that this is not a Tammy Miller specific issue. I mean, a lot of people do this thing where they demonize politicians while being a politician. But I think that's exactly the problem, that we end up with a situation where this sort of talk creates even more a distrust of politicians. Rob, you and I know a lot of politicians, people who ran for elected office, who are really, really great people, who are there for the right reasons. I get personally offended as the son of a state legislator and the spouse of a former state legislator and the spouse of a former state legislator when people broadly paint all politicians as being corrupt and whatever. Both my dad and my wife put a lot of professional things on hold in order to serve the public. And we see that throughout the North Dakota legislature and with state. You go up and down the Capitol, those statewide elected officials could leave and go to the private sector and make a lot more money. They could do a lot more things. They are true public servants, and I don't think we should demonize them just because they're choosing to run for office. And this idea that all politicians are bad or all politicians are corrupt is complete and utter nonsense. And I think it's a disservice, and it leads to a place where the right people don't run for office because they don't want to be labeled as a politician when they run for office. So we were talking recently, I think on the last week when we were on, you talking about open records, and that sort of gets you passionate. The idea of demonizing politicians is something that it's made me angry since I was a teenager, because again, I've seen the sacrifice firsthand from a lot of these folks.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean there's not terrible politicians, don't get me wrong.
Or that even good politicians aren't capable of
doing bad things.
Or saying something that makes you roll your eyes, or that's very self-serving or calculated. I mean, listen, I get it. And I feel that way about like government employees too. Like, I get frustrated at times with government employees who give me the runaround when I'm just trying to get good information, or will deny my open records or what have you. And the thing is, they're the minority though. And it's easy for me to talk about that minority and how frustrating they are and how egregious they are. But you also need to remember, okay, but there's a larger majority out here who aren't a problem. And nobody writes a story when somebody's really good about, getting right back to you with your open record. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of people in government I have great relationships with, even when they know that I'm probably going to write something that is not going to be so great for them. They're just really good, and they're really responsive because they care. So I don't like, it's so cynical, I think. And at a time where just that cynicism and that nihilism is chipping away at our institutions, we need to get back. We need to let some of it go. I would really like to start letting some of that go. It's not to say that there are good, there aren't politicians that make you want to pull your hair out. I see them too. I write about them all the time. They do make me want to pull my hair out, including some that I like a great deal. Doug Burgum, who I thought was on the balance a good governor, makes me want to pull my hair out sometimes, and I don't got that much hair left to be pulling out. So,
it is, and part of it is the idea that people on the ballot or are trying to move up the political ladder often feel like they have to say and do certain things that do cause people like you and I to pull out the little hair we have left, me less than you. And I just wish we'd get past that thing where people have to be performative in order to get elected. But you said it in our earlier interview that this isn't necessarily the people on the ballot's fault. This is the voters' fault.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we seem to, we seem to like it. I mean, there is something to be said about that. I mean, a lot of times we talk about these trends in politics like they're top down, like these are things that politicians and their campaigns are doing to us. And I think you've always got to remember they're doing it because it works, right? They're doing it because, and there's a point at which the voters aren't victims anymore. Like there's a point at which you know what you're voting for, and you kind of deserve to get it because you're choosing this. And there's always been that disconnect between, like the approval of Congress and the number of incumbents that get reelected. I mean, everybody, even here in North Dakota, like, the legislature doesn't have a particularly high approval rating most of the time, but yet most of the incumbents of the legislature get elected. There's a disconnect in public opinion there that I don't understand.
Yep.
So what else? We listed 3 things that we were going to talk about. Then we talked about this one, and now I don't remember the other 2 things.
So I complimented your column that was critical of Democrats for how they handled Biden saying
illegal immigrant
instead of
undocumented
migrant
or undocumented immigrant or something like that.
Rob, I will tell you, I did not watch the State of the Union, but I saw everything afterwards, and I was like, damn it, Democrats, Joe Biden performed. Universally, people said the guy performed, showed good energy, but somehow Democrats still figured out a way.
Well, not universally. Senator Kevin Cramer's press release was that it was the worst State of the Union he'd ever seen.
Well, okay,
which was speaking of those things when politicians you like say things that make you want to pull your hair out. Like, give me a break, Kevin.
By and large, people think Joe Biden did a pretty good job, and Democrats start criticizing him for something that no swing voter cares about. I mean, like you said in your column, treat people with respect. We need to make sure we're taking care of them. Joe Biden meant no disrespect by using the word illegal immigrant rather than undocumented.
Well, it's accurate. I mean, it's not an unfair term to use it. Like, it's not an unfair thing to say, because if you are in this country and you haven't, like, you've crossed into our country, you're here, in violation of our laws, you are illegal, right? And I am somebody, I do not like a lot of the dehumanizing ways we treat people who are in that situation. I don't like a lot of the ways we talk about them at times. It drives me nuts, but they are illegal. And
Joe Biden was not dehumanizing.
Right. Yeah.
That's not what he was doing.
Right. Well, not my point at all. He was using an accurate term. I don't have a problem with that term at all. And I just don't know. I mean, right now I got a lot of flack over that column because I got it from the right, where people are like, well, why are you trying to help Joe Biden win? And I'm not trying to help Joe Biden win. I don't really want either of these dopes to win. I wish this wasn't the choices we had, but that's beside the point. I want
Joe Biden to win, and I also don't think he's a dope. I just want to go on record and
fair
say
enough.
that.
Fair enough. But let me say that I would like to see the Democratic Party moderate, right? I mean, as much as we talk about how far to the right the right has moved under Donald Trump, or towards this sort of nationalist, populist, whatever you want to call it. There's a problem. Part of that partisanship problem is, Democrats not really doing a lot to appeal to people in our part of the world. And it's stuff like this, right? I mean, I think most of the country, Republican and Democrats, believes there's a problem at the border. So why are we going to throw pies at one another over nomenclature?
In my frustration is they don't. It seems like Democrats often don't know what fights to pick, right? I mean, I think there's things that it's not the best way to get what you want is by picking a fight with the president of your own party. I mean, it also seems like, it's Brandon Prichard, right? I mean, Brandon Prichard, the best way to get what you want is not to crap on all of your colleagues. It's not to say terrible things about the president. Or I'm sorry, the governor, like Brandon Prichard. So I don't understand, like, just the strategy behind, okay, this guy gives a speech. There's lots of things in it that we on the left like. So let's figure out the one thing that we're like. I just don't understand the strategy behind that. And I know there's constituencies and all that, but it feels like we're picking fights and talking about the things that run of the mill folks aren't worried about. They're worried about immigration. They're not worried about the language that's used to describe folks.
And it's you almost see like a feedback loop developing too, where it's, the left gets kind of sanctimonious about something, and so then the right comes out and it's like, well, now we're going to do that thing even harder. And then it becomes this stupid thing where we're just having a stupid fight over something that really doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter whether the president calls people who cross the border illegally illegal immigrants or undocumented. Honestly, it doesn't really bother that much. I don't get wrapped around the axle when people call them undocumented. That's accurate too. Illegal immigrant's accurate. Illegal immigrant has a little harder edge to it, but whatever. Who cares? What I care a lot more is, what are we going to do about it?
Yeah. Well, and it's one of those things, like you said, now the conservatives are going to use illegals all the time. It's sort of like letting the bully know what bothers you, and then they're just needling, they're
Right.
hitting that button all the time,
Right.
over and over and over.
Like, why did you do that? And especially, I mean, right now too, like Joe Biden, I think, needs to appeal to moderate Republicans, right? He needs to try to appeal to Nikki Haley voters who are just, they're disillusioned with Trump. They're watching, Trump now taking over the RNC. I mean, there's no daylight anymore between the Trump campaign and the RNC anymore. It's Trump's party. There's a lot of Republicans out there who are persuadable, who you could win over. And I will tell you, stuff like this is not what's going to win them over.
Well, and I think a lot of those Nikki Haley moderates who are uncomfortable with Trump are uncomfortable with Biden's age, right? And so he has this speech where, again, he overperformed in terms of expectations. I saw some tweet that said, when you set the bar at dementia, it's not that difficult to succeed. Well, here's the deal. He did a really great job. And if he can alleviate the fears on age with a bunch of those moderate Republicans, he wins this election. But rather than focusing on the energy and all the things that he's accomplished with the economy and other things, they're focused on a word, right? It's not good strategy.
It's not, but also, the voter, the electorate's not necessarily in a rational place right now either. So
right.
What was good strategy and conventional political wisdom once upon a time sometimes goes out the window right now, and we could do a whole other show on that. The other thing I wanted to talk about is our Congressman, Kelly Armstrong, who's currently running for governor, was a very prominent part of a recent House Judiciary Committee hearing with special counsel Robert Hur. Now, of course, you remember the Hur report came out, and it was the investigation into President Biden's handling of classified documents. And in it, he concluded that he could not prosecute President Biden, even though he had done the things, mishandled documents in prosecutor in Hur's conclusion, but that he wasn't competent to stand trial, essentially. That was a tough thing that brings the age issue back into play. What I thought was really interesting is Congressman Armstrong's. He makes some really good points. Like, if you watch sort of one of the 5-minute, because each member of the committee gets like a 5-minute thing, time allotment to question. You look at it, it is lucid, it is succinct, it makes sense. Where he's talking about essentially like everything Biden did meets the standards of the law for prosecuting it, and then we get to an end of it and you don't prosecute him. And in some ways, they're kind of making the argument, weirdly, Republicans coming full circle, that Joe Biden's not that compromised and could stand trial for this. Now you have the additional complication of trying to prosecute a sitting president, which is, it's so weird that we have to talk about things like that right now, but we do. And the other point he made is that there are 3 people who have run for president since 2016: Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden. They've all had, scandals about their handling of classified documents, and Donald Trump's the only one prosecuted for it. I think that's a fair point. Now, we can say there's a difference in, what do we want to say, scope. There's a difference in maybe how egregious
response to it.
Each situation is. But sure, fair enough. I think you could say there's a double standard there. And that double standard's been helping Donald Trump. You look what happened to his poll numbers after the first indictment. The feeling that Donald Trump is not being dealt with fairly by our criminal justice system and our civil courts is driving a lot of his march back to the White House. And so, anything that's even a lot of the things that the Trumpists say about that is baloney. But this, I think, has the grain of truth to it. And in this instance, because it's kind of got a grain of truth to this one, it kind of feeds all the other ones, and that bothers me. But then you come around here's where I come full circle, is even if you believe that there's a double standard, right, and that Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden should be held to account for what they've done with classified, even if you believe that, you're still endorsing Donald Trump. Like that has no bearing on whether or not Donald Trump did what he's accused of doing.
Yeah, at the end of the day, they may have been succinct. They may have been good political talking points, but I didn't love those 5 minutes of Kelly Armstrong. I mean, I think essentially what he was saying is, Joe Biden should have been indicted, but doesn't that then say you agree with the indictment of Donald Trump?
See, that's the point that I'm getting at.
Like, I don't get that. How you can basically sit in this hearing and, kudos to Special Prosecutor Herr. I mean, he managed to completely piss off both parties with his report by not indicting and then including this stuff about his medical diagnosis on the president. But yeah, I mean, it was, again, when you do those sort of 5 minutes, everybody's 5 minutes in, spotlight sort of thing, you never really get anything good out of it. Kelly used his time exceptionally smart for what he's trying to do. But what I heard him say is that Donald Trump should be indicted for the way he
But that's the point I'm trying to make. Like I'm
right.
Like there's a logical fallacy. It's called tu quoque, which is Latin for you also. It's basically the "you did it too" defense, or whataboutism, or whatever you want to call it. And essentially that's what we're doing here is like, well, I mean, is the argument that Donald Trump should get off because Joe Biden should get off? Because that doesn't. I mean, let's put that in another context. Let's say that the prosecution in some county, has a double standard when it comes to bringing murder charges. And they brought murder charges against this one person, but not against this other person for reasons having to do with politics or socioeconomic class or race or what have you.
Or the fact that they're completely different cases.
Well, maybe, but I mean, you can say, I mean, the argument can't be, I think this guy should be let off for murder because they let that guy let off for murder. Like, that's not a defense of Donald Trump. And I realize that you want to make the point that these are not apples to apples cases, and I think that's fair. But I'm putting a pin in that. Even if we stipulate to the idea that these are equivalent situations, you're still essentially arguing that Donald Trump should get off because Joe Biden got off. And that, I don't think, is a defensible position.
Yeah, and I also think this is just part of, I mean, we used to, not that long ago, trust DOJ, trust the court system, whatever. But now, I mean, certainly on the right, there's a feeling that the DOJ has been politicized. There is the, but what about that guy? I mean, I'll admit that I have some amount of blinders when it comes to Biden and these documents, right? I mean, I'll admit that, and I think that most people do. When it comes to if you're a conservative, it's like Biden did everything wrong. If it's Trump, he didn't do anything wrong, and that's sort of the world we live in, and it's unfortunate. And we don't call out the hypocrisy on ourselves, or we don't think about the hypocrisy of the hearing with Special Prosecutor Herr. I don't know. It's a long way of saying we're still broken.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and that distrust for the courts and stuff. I mean, you look at the reaction, of people on the left right now are having to the Supreme Court. I remember once upon a time, when the makeup of the Supreme Court was very different, and we'd have debates about things like abortion and stuff, and liberals were like, the Supreme Court has spoken, right? It's the law of the land, shut up. And now it's like, well, okay, the Supreme Court has spoken again.
But now they should shut up.
But now
the Supreme Court should shut up.
But now the Supreme Court is partisan and compromised and everything else. And I mean, even the thing where the Supreme Court's taking up the question of Donald Trump's immunity, right? And I'm hearing liberals complain about it, like, oh, the Supreme Court's just helping them push it out to the election. I don't know. Like, it's a pretty thorny, legal question. Like, and unprecedented, by the way. It's not like we have a lot of case law for this. It's an unusual situation. The Supreme Court should take it up, and they should consider it. And I don't know that they should be considering political timelines when they do it. Right. So I mean, that mistrust goes both ways.
Yeah. And on one hand, say that we don't want the court to be political, but at the same time, encourage them to take the timeline of the election into consideration when making a decision.
And by the way, when they ruled on keeping Trump on the ballot, unanimous decision, by the way. Yeah. It was every justice on the court.
Here's the deal. Democrats, the strategy to win the presidential election is not to kick Donald Trump off the ballot in blue states. All that does is help Donald Trump. So stop it.
Yeah, you
Stop
make him look like a martyr. You make him look like a victim. I mean, that's some of the stuff I've been worried about with the indictments. Listen, I want accountability for Donald Trump. He's done things that he should be held accountable for. And you know, prosecutors can't take into account what impact it's going to have on his polls and stuff. But there's no question that these indictments have helped him.
Well, and again, going back to the kicking him off the ballot, it's all in states that Biden is going to win. Like, I don't know what the upside of taking him off the ballot in Illinois or Colorado or
Michigan. Michigan
places.
Was a swing.
Yeah, I suppose.
Yeah, Michigan was one where it could have been.
Well, I'm all for kicking him off the ballot in Michigan.
Yeah, see how that works? It's convenient when it works for me. By the way, I mean, and we should close out the podcast here, though. But I mean, if there's one thing we can leave is this sort of conditional reaction to things. Like, it's, you know, I would when Donald Trump supporters were chanting in 2016 that we should lock Hillary Clinton up because of her emails, I don't know that they ever imagined they'd be in a position where suddenly actually trying to lock Donald Trump up was
a real possibility
for not emails, but certainly the same sort of, I mean, what is functionally the same thing, if a different medium, classified government information. I mean, it's like you can't have both standards. You can't say lock Hillary Clinton up, but Donald Trump should get a pass.
Right.
You know, this is ridiculous. We've got to find a standard and apply the standard equally to everybody. And first of all, I don't think we're doing that. And second of all, everybody involved is basing their opinion on it for what's working best for them in this political moment. And that's terrible.
Yep.
All right.
Well, one other thing I was going to bring up, but I know we're wrapping it up, is, Rob, don't you think that if you're given the opportunity to give the opposition response to the State of the Union, you should just say no?
I don't know that it's worked out for anybody.
Yes, nobody's ever been after that was a great response. Katie Britt has now been defined for she's 40 years old and she's now defined by that.
Katie Britt's younger than I am, which is depressing for me.
Yeah.
Because I don't like looking at members. In my mind, everybody in Congress is like way older than me. There's a lot of members of Congress.
She looks a lot younger than us too.
Right. Yeah. Well, you and I have not aged well, so that's not. What was that? What was your line about setting the bar at dementia? You know, you and I set the bar at geriatric. So that's
a way to end a podcast.
That is not a tough bar to get over, is looking better than us two. But she, you know, I don't, I agree. I mean, Marco Rubio and the bottle of water. I mean, it's
Bobby Jindal.
Well, the whole thing of I think that it's sort of an anachronism from a different age. You know, everybody's putting their hot takes on. I mean, some of them are shouting their hot takes at the president while he's delivering the address.
Thank you, Marjorie.
Yeah. So that's exactly what I want the American republic to be like. You know,
nice outfit, Marjorie Taylor Greene. I mean, come on.
I am getting really tired of everybody has to have a costume on. Everybody's got to have a button on and all this stuff. I mean, I get it. It's politics. Everyone's having their say, but just, I mean, it's a decorum argument, I guess. Just knock it off. Anyway, well, we are going to wrap it up there. Closing message, stop being hypocrites. And also please send kind thoughts to Garrett Cole's elbow and hope that he gets better in advance of this baseball
Aaron
season.
Judge's everything?
And Aaron Judge's toe and his abdomen and everything else. These millionaire players need your support.
They got boo-boos.
They got boo-boos. All right. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll talk again. Did you know Forum Communications Company has a robust podcast library? At inforum.com/podcasts, we have everything from politics, sports, true crime, outdoor adventure, and more. Visit inforum.com/podcasts and explore them all today.